Don't ever give up. Get to the cause. You get to the cause, you remove it, you will get well. That's how I got my life back. It wasn't a magic vitamin. It wasn't a pill, powder, potion, lotion. I removed the cause, the body healed. It is that simple. It is that magic that the body can do. So, therein lies the solution. Well, we've learned now that just because your mom or dad has it, that doesn't mean that you should have it. A gene is turned on. But we've been taught that, oh, you have diabetes because your parents have it. Science knows that, but the public doesn't understand that yet, that we trigger genes. And by the way, toxins and stressors are one of the big things that turn on these genes.
Hello and welcome back to I Thrive, rising from the depths of diabetes and obesity. I'm your host, John McMahon. I'm morbidly obese and a type 2 diabetic who is pretty far down the path of this disease's many complications. I'm on a quest to find the truth about diabetes and obesity, make a plan, and execute a radical lifestyle turnaround. In the process, I found my purpose and decided to do a documentary of this journey to share and inspire others. Thank you for joining us for episode 7, 3 Killer Toxins Rising from the Mud for a Clean Start. In the last couple of episodes, we've gone deep into the biochemistry and psychology of food addiction. We're starting to put together a toolbox that will help us work our way out of the mud and live thriving lives. Today, we'll have our guest review and summarize the challenges that the diabetes and obesity pandemic pose, then go deep into our environment and uncover 3 killer toxins that put us at even further risk than our food does. Let's go to Dr. Pompa.
Most people think of diabetes as something that is not affecting them. I can assure you it is. Most people think of diabetes as something that, well, all I need is a medication. And thank God we have insulin, metformin, and all these wonderful medications that even if I get it, I'll be okay because Joe, Mary, they have diabetes and they look fine. They're great. They're doing just fine. I can tell you this right now. They're not doing fine at the cellular level. That those medications may make your glucose better, but the outcome of your health, early death, stroke, heart disease, is exactly the same, if not worse. So the medications are not fixing anything. Doctors know this, but when they use glucose as a gauge, it looks like it's working. But I can assure you the science is showing it's not working. People don't die from diabetes. They die of the complications of diabetes. Understand this. Whether it's dementia, Alzheimer's, heart disease, stroke, cancer, go down the list. One of my colleagues, Thomas Seyfried, just wrote a book called Cancer as a Metabolic Disease. What that means is, metabolic means diabetes, glucose, insulin. We know that the big problem with cancer is the mitochondria where you make energy. And I don't want to get too scientific here, but understand this. As a diabetic, your mitochondria where you make energy is broken. Understand that cancer is a problem with glucose and insulin. Even when you force glucose into your cell with a medication, we know that this is leading to cancer. Seyfried's work, it's amazing work that's showing what we really didn't understand. You don't get cancer because you had a gene. You got cancer because of a metabolic issue. And you want to talk about the number one metabolic issue, and it's the subject right here, diabetes. You know, I want to paint a picture for people watching this, because you end up in front of your doctor, right? I mean, in my case, that's normal, right? It's pre-diabetes is normal. Well, yeah, well, it may be normal. Let me reverse that. It may be common in this country, on this planet, but it is absolutely not normal. So that's pre-diabetes. Oh, you have some high numbers, and you know what they tell you? Just kind of, maybe watch their diet. However, many doctors, they don't even believe diet is a factor. They really believe in their heart of hearts, well, if it's in your family, you're going to get it anyway. And again, that's completely disproven. We know that we turn these genes on, right? So, but yet that's what's told. Now, okay, then fast forward 10 years from now. Oh, now your glucose levels are this. Oh, now you have diabetes. So now you're diagnosed with diabetes, right? You're given the label of diabetes. So, but no problem, because you leave there with some prescriptions that you fill. I think when you leave there, you're stunned because you didn't think it would get there. But the doctor now has assured you that it's all okay. Take these, come back in a month or two, and, we'll see where you are. So, okay, you trust the doctor, you take the medications, you're nervous, you come back in, you sit right back in front of him, he looks at your new blood work and says, fantastic, looks great. You leave very happy. You leave like, man, I love that guy, right? I mean, saved my life, thank God. You know what, I think I even feel a little better too. So time goes on, and maybe it's a year, maybe it's 2, maybe it's 3, maybe it's 5. And now all of a sudden you're getting numbness and tingling in your toes, your extremities, who knows? You go back into the doctor and he says, okay, let me give you another medication. So you end up perhaps on another medication. Maybe that one works, maybe it doesn't. You're not even talking about diet at this point, even if it was a recommendation, right? So now you're on what we call the medical treadmill. Oh, now you're high blood pressure. See, there's not a correlation made with glucose driving inflammation, insulin, which I have a saying, if you want to age faster than anybody in your neighborhood, in your Bible study, whatever it is, just elevate your glucose and insulin. And see, it's spikes of glucose and insulin, meaning you eat and it's too high. Then it goes back to normal, and then it's too high. Then it goes back to normal, then it's too high. Then you take your medication, so it's up, insulin and glucose, spike, 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 spike. Basically, that's drives this problem known as inflammation. And I think most people watching this have heard something that inflammation is the cause basically of every disease, right? You don't want it. Well, what they don't know is spikes of glucose and insulin are one of the number one causes. And we've talked a little bit about toxins, which we're going to get to more. That may be the number one cause right there. You put these two things together, forget it, right? So you want to age faster, you want to drive this cellular inflammation problem, spiking glucose and insulin, right? So the doctor doesn't tell you that. He's putting you on the medication, your glucose looks normal on that test, but meanwhile, you're still spiking glucose and insulin. And here's what he doesn't tell you. That yes, it may make your blood glucose levels normal, but what it's doing is it's pushing the glucose into your body, in other places, into your liver, into your tissues. It's creating fatty liver. It's creating fatty pancreas and fatty organs. So even if you're the skinny guy with diabetes, because I think diabetes gets pinned on just the obesity person, that's an issue. However, the skinny person oftentimes has the fattier organs, which can be even a greater problem at times. So the medication pushes the glucose into the body, which is causing degeneration. It's not slowing down neuropathy of nerves, which simply means the nerves are degenerating faster than normal, right? And that's the tingling that maybe you went in and said, hey doc, what's this? Oh yeah, let's give you another medication, covered that up for another year or two, but it's still there. He's not telling you that the glucose and insulin is causing that. He's not telling you that the glucose and insulin, the glucose being pushed into the other parts of the body is degenerating your brain and other tissues. He's not telling you that. And that's why it leads to heart attacks, strokes, and dementia. He's not telling you that the insulin spikes is basically causing something in your brain, an enzyme, insulin-degrading enzyme, IDE, that basically gets rid of insulin in the brain. Why does it do that? Because it's so poisonous. But here's what he doesn't tell you. The same enzyme gets rid of amyloid plaque, right? So we've heard of that with certain conditions, right? Like Parkinson's, etc. So what he doesn't tell you is that when you're diminishing that enzyme, now it's leading to a neurodegenerative disease, right? So that's what he's not telling you. So yeah, you're causing early aging in your body, in your skin, early wrinkles, right? I mean, for people who say, hey, I don't want to look bad. I don't really care about my liver. You should, but I don't really care about my brain. You should. But the point is that this glucose and insulin problem, even though your blood work looks normal, what's happening is you are dying sooner. You're degenerating. Your brain, your organs, your cells, your tissues, your nerves. And those on medications, they still end up one day walking in there, and then the diagnosis is this. Oh, we have to remove your toes. How about that? And I know most people watching this don't think they'll get there, but I promise you, I'm telling you a story that happens again and again and again. And what we're looking at here is by 2020, these are the estimates, 1 in 3 people diagnosed with diabetes, right? We're talking about affecting children at younger and younger ages. This is what we're not realizing. Diabetes is we talk about drugs being gateway drugs, right? Entering into the next drug. Well, diabetes is that, right? It's the gateway to other diseases, dementia, Alzheimer's, stroke, etc. So this is what we have to understand. And it starts with, yeah, that's weird. My glucose is up in the mornings. It starts as simple as that. And then it leads to those other issues. That's what really diabetes is. When I was in 9th grade, I already had high blood pressure. And I actually already had doctors telling me, oh, your glucose is high, but you'll be okay, right? Oh, it's high, it's just high. And I'm saying, and I just recall that, only to find out later when I could test my own that that's not normal. Once I started being educated in school, I'm like, that's not normal. I'm high 90s, that's not normal. I was already on the tracks. No doctor would have told me that. No doctor. Yeah, and looking at it's in my family. My mother, stroke, which is, she had it all, right? It's like, her mother was a diabetic. It's in my family, diabetes and heart disease. It's like I was on the same track. Now I'm not. It was a choice. It was education, and it was a choice. Yeah, that's the track, right? I chose a different track. I think that is a really good message. You can choose a different track too. The problem is once you get to so far, now you've lost things. Now you've lost brain. Now you've lost cells that may not come back. Now you've lost. It doesn't have to be that way, right? Diabetes, the public's been taught that there's an answer and it's really no big deal. That answer kills you. It just lowers blood glucose, which means nothing. It means nothing as far as you living longer. Diabetics, they don't die from diabetes. They die from strokes, heart attack, cancer, you name it. Elevates all of those. And no one makes that connection either. The public has been duped, into thinking that this is helping them. The fact is it does nothing to make you live any longer. Absolutely not healthier. Quite the opposite. I think there's some confusion about some of the different types of diabetes, right? We've heard of type 1, type 2. Now there's type 1.5 and even type 3. So I think there needs to be a little explanation here. Type 1 is an autoimmune condition where the body literally attacks the beta cells that make insulin in the pancreas. And once those beta cells are completely gone, then insulin is needed. We typically see that in young children, right? Because that's why we call type 2 diabetes adult onset, meaning the standard American way is elevated glucose, too many carbs, and as I'm going to tell you a little bit about the toxins, is really a main driver of type 2. However, type 1, is autoimmune. And we realize that certain infections, certain toxins, can happen after certain vaccines. Something can trigger autoimmune and a stressor of any type. And then it turns on this gene, and all of a sudden now your own immune system is attacking itself. So I think people are familiar with autoimmune, I think more with conditions like rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, right? Maybe Crohn's, colitis, but yet we don't think of type 1 as autoimmune. Well, it is. So, but we still have to back up. And I want to say one thing, the solutions that we have when you really address the cause of diabetes, we're going to talk about diet, we're going to talk about cellular detox, and it still is a main player for type 1 diabetes, even though you need to take insulin because your cells aren't producing it. The problem is if your cells can't hear the insulin that you're taking, okay, because it's not getting its message into the cell, we call that insulin resistance, okay? It's not hearing, and I'm going to build on that concept. Well, the problem is then you have to take even more and more insulin as a type 1 diabetic. And here's the problem. It degenerates you. It creates degeneration, inflammation in other parts of the body. So the bottom line is the type 1 diabetic still wants to take as little as you can, and you want your cells to hear it very well. The reason is you will live longer. So controlling that inflammation is very, very critical. So a type 1, this whole story that we're going to tell still applies. Okay, type 2, insulin resistance. We talk about the cell not hearing things. I want to kind of rephrase it as hormone resistance, because once you become resistant to one hormone, whether it's insulin, thyroid hormone, testosterone, estrogen, all of those hormones can be resistant to your cells. And I want to make it more clear because I probably lost some people right here. I'm going to make it very, very simple to understand. Your cells, your body can produce certain hormones. Okay, so your thyroid can produce an active thyroid hormone or even a stored hormone called T4. Then it has to convert T4 into T3. That's the hormone that your cells have to hear. Now imagine your cells being inflamed because of elevated glucose and insulin and toxins that come attach to that cell, and it inflames it. Now, if you did this over your ears, now you can't hear me as well. So think of that inflammation around the cell as blunting the cell's ability to hear the hormones. It drives inflammation. If this is one of your 50 trillion cells, it drives inflammation and it blunts the receptors, and that's why I keep doing this. It blunts the antennas, if you will, to those hormones. So now they can't hear or attach to those hormones as well. So let's look at insulin when we talk about insulin resistance. Insulin has to come in, dock and attach to one of those receptors, and then get its message in the cell, and then the glucose comes in and it does its magic and it makes energy, and all that works fine, great. But when the cell receptors or those insulin receptors are blunted, now you need more insulin to get the job done, right? And so now you're producing more insulin, which degenerates you faster, right? Think of elevated glucose and insulin as something that degenerates you faster. Now the glucose isn't getting in either, so now you have elevated spikes of insulin and glucose. That's insulin resistance, okay? So that's type 2 diabetes. Now, we can give you drugs to push insulin up even further. Think about that. So now, okay, great. Now that glucose is getting in the cells, and the doctor looks at your blood work and says, hey, it's good. But that's not normal. We didn't do anything for the cell not hearing it. Those of you who have kids, I think, can relate to this. We shout at our kids. In the beginning, it actually works. Okay, so that's analogous to taking more hormones, right? Whether it's insulin or something that pushes up insulin or thyroid hormone. We take hormones, it could be estrogen too, and you may feel better in the beginning, right? Because taking more pushes the things in the cell and gets the job done. But as we shout at our kids more, do they hear us more or less? They hear us less, yeah. So they're actually not hearing us more. They start hearing us less and less and less. That's exactly what's happening to our cells. So I think taking hormones is very in vogue right now, whether, again, it's estrogen, whatever it is. There's a time and a place. But understand this, that it's shouting at your kids, it's shouting at your cells, and eventually the cells just start to shut down. And now those very things that worked aren't working. Here's the scary part. You go to your doctor, whether it's thyroid, whether it's diabetes, and by the way, those two things, they run hand in hand. Those with thyroid end up with diabetes. Diabetes end up with thyroid problems, right? And other hormone problems that aren't diagnosed oftentimes, which leads to weight loss resistance, another subject we can get into. But if we understand what's happening at the cell, remember I started this conversation by saying if you don't fix the cell, you won't get well. So the cells are shutting down to these hormones. And now we're taking more hormones, and eventually it doesn't work. And here is the scary part. Your blood work looks normal because the hormones that you're taking make it look normal. But the problem is your cell's not getting the message. The bottom line, this is why you still don't feel well. This is why you're going to your doctor going, wait a minute, my insulin, my glucose, my numbers look better. My thyroid numbers look better, whatever it is. My estrogen numbers look better. My testosterone numbers get better, but I still don't feel well. It's because nobody is going to where the epidemic, or in this case, the pandemic really is, and that's the cell. You will not get well until you fix the cell. So then we better ask ourselves this question. What's driving the pandemic of cellular inflammation, which is actually what's blocking these hormone receptors, causing insulin resistance, estrogen resistance, thyroid resistance? You can plug in the hormone, and the problem is what's at the cell. Now, I said that's type 1, type 2, and then there, believe it or not, is a type 3. Alzheimer's. I want to say all neurodegenerative conditions. The brain is now a type 3. And that means that it's now to the point where it's affecting the brain as another tissue being driven by inflammation. Type 1.5, where we look in between going, type 2 diabetics are now, they're burning out their pancreas. So yeah, type 1, the body attacked those cells in the pancreas, but now 1.5, the type 2s are crossing over to where I'll call it pancreatic poop out, where it's done. It's just completely gone. Those are the 1.5s that, we've stuffed so much glucose into the liver and the pancreas. Now you have fatty liver and fatty pancreas, and they start malfunctioning. So this is an explanation from type 1, 1.5, 2, and 3. But the bottom line is, if you don't fix the cell, you won't get well.
I keep hearing the same thing, how dangerous diabetes is, obesity or no obesity, and further validation that our medical approach to managing blood sugar and A1Cs does not address the cause, insulin resistance. And even type 1s can become insulin resistant, which means they can become both type 1 and type 2. Furthermore, this could be a sign that I'm hormone resistant across the board. If you feel inspired by any of these insights, I invite you to join me. Join this movement, become an active part of the community, and consider supporting this mission. By owning the complete series, you can reference it again and again to inform your own plan to wellness, or share it with a loved one and help them create their own plan. Diabetes is the gateway disease, as Dr. Pompa said, the mother of all diseases, like Dr. Deal said. Let's continue and uncover how environmental toxins can drive this pandemic as well.
Okay, as promised, toxins affect, and the term that I've coined is TIR, T-I-I-R, toxin-induced insulin resistance. Toxins are, to me, the 800-pound gorilla in the room, but really the hidden cause of this epidemic. And others, I could link the thyroid and even why people can't lose weight today, aka weight loss resistance, meaning that we have more and more people who are eating perfect, exercising, doing all these things, still don't feel well and still can't lose weight. Or maybe they've lost 10 pounds, 15, 20 and stopped. This is an epidemic linked to what I believe is at the heart of it is toxins. All right, so I explained the cell. I explained that we know that inflammation is the cause of all these problems. But I think when we think of inflammation, we think of inflammation as my sore shoulder, ankle, whatever it is, and that's inflammation. But more specifically, cellular inflammation, where the cells are inflamed and now the cells aren't functioning normal. So good things can't get in inflamed cells, bad things can't get out. So now the cell becomes more and more toxic. The receptors, as I explained, to every hormone, vitamin, mineral, receptor, everything is now blunted. So now communication with the outside world of the cell is being blocked. This is why people still don't feel well. And by the way, this is why people can't lose weight. So whether it's thyroid hormone that the cell can't hear, which has a lot to do with how your body uses fat as energy, and has a lot to do with your hair, your skin, energy levels, fatigue, brain fog. Cell can't hear thyroid hormone. Doesn't matter how much you take. Eventually, it just makes the problem worse. Again, testosterone, estrogen, we have to understand that if the cell can't hear those things, you won't feel well. Inflammation is driving it. So toxins, where do they go? They make their way to fatty areas. Your membrane of the cell is a lipid bilayer. Simply put, 2 layers of fat. Toxins come in and around and they drive that inflammation. And that's what's driving the problem. Now you can't get good stuff in, bad stuff out. Oh, and here's the other problem. Now the cell itself, because it can't get the toxins out. Oh, and by the way, toxins that it makes itself when it makes energy so you can live. So when you make energy, ATP, in one of your mitochondria, there's all kinds of byproducts that the cell has to get rid of. It has to detox naturally. A great example of that is if I started a fire in this room, it would be the smoke that killed us, right? It would kill us before the flames. Or if we had a chimney and vented it out, we'd be here with a nice warm fire and perfect, right? But if we blocked the damper, right, we would die. Smoke inhalation. That's what's happening in an inflamed cell. Your cell's making energy like the fire in the room, but the inflammation doesn't allow the toxins from the energy production to escape. Now here's what happens, one more step. Now genes in the nucleus, which is in every cell, start getting triggered. Remember I said earlier, you don't have diabetes because your mom or dad had it. It's been turned on. So now this toxic cell, driven by inflammation, driven by toxins, making more toxins, is turning on the gene. So now you have an epigenetic, it's called, or gene expression of diabetes. Who's dealing with that? There's a gap in the science world and the treatment world. Scientists know that this is an epigenetic, that stressors, physical, chemical, or emotional, can turn on that gene. They know that certain toxins that we're all being exposed to can turn on that gene. But yet, in the treatment world, nobody's dealing with this. So I'll say it again, you have to get to the cell to get well, right? You have to fix the cell. And in this case, you have to detox the cell. If we're going to deal with the number one thing driving inflammation, and it is toxins, this is an epidemic. So I opened up the door of why people can't lose weight. So thyroid hormone, if your cell can't hear it, weight loss becomes impossible, even with a dietary change, because these toxins are coming into the cell, driving the inflammation, turning on genes, perhaps. There's a study, it was a Duke University study. Here's another way toxins are driving this epidemic. In this study, they took 2 identical twin groups of mice, same genes, same DNA, and they separated these brothers and sisters. They put them in the exact same environments, fed them the same, everything perfectly the same. And the difference was this, they exposed one to a toxin that we're all exposed to, BPA, plastic, drinking out of plastic, makeup, plastic, body care products, it's in everything. They exposed the mice to a level that would be considered a human level that we're being exposed to. It turned on a gene called the agouti gene. Now, this gene made their hair yellow, dry, sounded like a thyroid condition, certain heart disease, they became obese. So here are these obese mice, they triggered the gene. Now here's the worst part. The next generation the gene was triggered, turned on, even without changing their diet. So the same diet over here that kept these mice thin and healthy was the same diet over here. The next generation was born doomed to obesity, thyroid conditions, etc., diabetes, you name it, just because of the exposure to the toxins. So it affected the next generation. Despite what they ate, despite what they did, the gene was turned on. Sound familiar? So those little teenage mice were affected. Now here's the best part. They did certain things to these mice that they turned off the gene. Herein lies the separation of what scientists know and doctors aren't doing. They turned off the gene. So then the next generation was born with the gene turned off. We're triggering these genes. Part of the solution here is turning off these genes, just like in the Duke study. So toxins are the number one source that we know, the stressor, the number one stressor that's turning on these genes. So yeah, toxins are driving the cellular inflammation, blunting the hormones to the cell, resistance. Toxins are driving the inflammation, causing the buildup of toxins in the cell, turning on the genes. Toxins directly are entering into the cell, triggering those genes as well. You can see this is multifaceted. But I said earlier that toxins, it's estimated in one study, that are responsible for 35% of the diabetes. Well, we can extrapolate that to weight loss resistance. We can extrapolate that to thyroid conditions. And I believe it's even greater than that. I believe when you realize that it's also turning on autoimmune, and now you add that component because toxins trigger the genes of autoimmune. We all have susceptibilities, but a toxin can turn that on. And now we add that in. It could be 50%, it could be surprisingly 80%. But toxins are the hidden cause that really nobody's dealing with. And I'm blessed because of what I went through to be able to train doctors in what I call cellular detox or true cellular detox in getting to this cause, getting to this real problem. So this has become an epidemic or a pandemic within the pandemic of toxins driving this. And I could keep going down this issue because toxins deplete something called methylation. It's become kind of popular because there's something called the MTHFR gene, and everyone's like, do you have the gene? 15 to 20% of the population have a gene, a SNP really, it's called, and I don't want to get into the technical details there, but it makes you not be able to make these methyl groups that are so important to protect our DNA, to make our cells detox normally. I mean, there's all these functions. But here's the bottom line. Toxic stress depletes these methylation, whether you have that gene or not. All of us are depleting our methylation, which is depleting our cells' ability to detox and depleting the methylation that we need to protect that DNA. In that mice study that I talked about, that Duke study, they gave those mice methyl groups to turn off the gene. That's how important they are. Toxins deplete it. So now we don't have these methyl groups to turn off our bad genes. So now you're expressing symptoms, conditions that you thought you just inherited from mom. But meanwhile, toxins are driving the problem multiple different ways. Okay, so I opened up Pandora's box about toxins. So now I think most people watching this are probably saying, okay, what toxins? Where am I getting them from? I've given several lectures on what I say, three main toxins, right? There's so many different toxins around us, but three that I think are the bad boys, three that are affecting 4 generations when we look at studies, that are affecting all of us. And I think it's a surprise to many. But if we just look at these three, then I think we can narrow down solutions. All right, let's start with mercury. I never finished my story, but I'm going to finish it now. So I opened up my story, and with my story, because it was pain to purpose, it had been some years, and I was figuring out those insomnia nights because I couldn't sleep at night. And when I could think, because I had massive brain fog, I would wake up in the middle of the night, read, research, and my brain was working, it wasn't working. So I had to do it when it was working. But I found something called Mad Hatter's disease. And some people watching this may have heard it, some people may not have, but there was a group of people making hats, felt hats in particular, and they used mercury to attenuate some of the molds that would be produced in the felt. And they used mercury, and they became mercury poisoned. And it became known as Mad Hatter's disease. So I looked at the symptoms of Mad Hatters, and I said, I'm mad as a hatter. I have all these symptoms. So I went to the best, Allegheny General, and I got the head of toxicology, and I ran a blood test. And $4,000 worth of other tests that, by the way, came out negative. My blood work looked normal, and yet my life was falling out from underneath me. But I was disappointed, of course. It was a year or so later. I became friends with a very bright endocrinologist because my thyroid, I knew, was not working. Even though my blood work looked normal, unfortunately, my adrenals were shot. He said to me one day, he said, Dan, I think you have mercury toxicity. And I said, I thought so too. But I did a blood test. It was negative. He said, wrong test. That's for acute mercury poisoning. It's only in your blood for a few days and then it's gone. So I think you have chronic mercury poisoning. And he said, do this test, which is more of a challenge test, what's locked in your tissues. And then there it showed up. So of course I asked what most people would ask, what do you how did it get there? And he said, did you have any dental work done around the time this happened? And I said, yeah, I may have, because they took an amalgam filling. It was actually like 1.5, almost 2 fillings out, and they put gold in on a crown. And so I don't know if that correlated at the same time. Well, I was cycling at the time, as I mentioned, so I had a journal. So I knew when my symptoms started. I called my dentist, who was one of my good friends, and he gave me the date as when he did that work. And it was just days after that my symptoms started. And remember, it started with just fatigue. And then it went to all those other things, insomnia, anxiety, etc. I had mercury poisoning, chronic mercury poisoning. What I learned was these fillings are 50% mercury. They vaporize mercury, the life of the filling. And amalgam illness, as it's known, doesn't happen until your 30s and 40s and 50s because it just builds up. It bioaccumulates in the brain. And what I found out, the irony is this. When I realized every time I tried to address my adrenals and thyroid, I realized that certain things would get better, certain things would get worse. So I knew it was my pituitary, and that sits in the center of your brain, your pituitary hypothalamus that controls your adrenals and your thyroid, your whole hormone system, right? So I knew it was that, but I just didn't know what was wrong. Well, after I started reading studies, that's where most of the mercury accumulates, in the pituitary hypothalamus. So another way toxins cause hormone problems, because in the center of the brain is what controls all your hormones. So of course, then my next question was, how do I get this out of my brain? Now that's what I teach, because I had to learn this. I wasn't going to make another mistake. So really, real detox, true detox has to get to the cell. More specifically, you have to get it out of here too. This is the epidemic. This is why we look at children, autism, 1 out of 2 kids. It's the estimate, if it continues at the same pace, by 2032, 1 out of 2, really? It's hard for me to understand that until you understand these 3 toxins affecting 4 generations, right? So in 2 ways. Mercury from fillings. We look at the vaccine schedules today and realize that most of them still contain ethyl mercury. That's a type of mercury that crosses right into the brain. Even the vaccines that they take it out of have higher aluminum levels. Hugh Fudenberg is at least the most quoted immunologist of our time, right? He's maybe the most well-known, quoted. He has 850 peer-reviewed papers. I think the guy knows a little bit about immunology. One of his studies, they took a 10-year period. People that got 5 consecutive flu shots in that 10-year period, 10-fold increase in Parkinson's. We see that happening with Alzheimer's. We see that happening. And by the way, Hugh took some heat from the CDC because of that. He stands by his result. He does. But if you look today on the CDC website, they still criticize Hugh. However, he stands by his result. When asked why, he says it's the mercury and aluminum bioaccumulation in the brain. That's what's driving the problem. So whether it's autism, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, diabetes, we know that these toxins are playing a role. The over-vaccinations, the amalgams, and here's the hidden one. There's a study called the DRESH study. There's another one called the TAGM study. The number of fillings, Mom, in your mouth is proportional on these studies. And the DRESH study was an autopsy study. It's proportional to how much mercury we find in the baby's brains. Very accurate. So on autopsy, they're looking at that and they can count mom's fillings and realize that it's going from mom to baby in utero. So we start this in here, and then it's the vaccines, and then it's amalgam fillings, and then it's other exposures along the way. All right, let's go to lead. Lead, that's the second one, okay? The number one cause of lead toxicity is mom. Most of the lead that we are exposed to, we all grew up in the lead generation and our parents, as well as the mercury generation. Most of the lead is stored in the bones. What do you lose during pregnancy? You lose bone. It's normal, it's natural. Ladies lose bone during pregnancy, but the problem is this: out comes the lead. And we know it's going into baby in utero. Number one exposure, you can get it from painted dishes from China, etc., and leads in homes built before 1978, but the problem is generational. Now here's the problem. Both of these things, the problem is generational two ways. Number one, physical inheritance, as I just pointed out in these studies, physical inheritance from mom to baby, starting life this way. Secondly, epigenetically, it's turning on the genes in utero. So again, just like the Duke study, the mice were born doomed to become obese or with diabetes, right? The same thing's happening. So we're getting these toxins from mom to baby, right? The third toxin is what new studies are showing is causing the epidemic, the pandemics that we're looking at: diabetes, thyroid, autism, Parkinson's, you name it. You realize, these things are exploding, and the public doesn't see this because we think we have answers. As we pointed out, we don't, unless we get to the cause, and we do have answers there. So this is a new problem. The third toxin is setting the stage for the pandemic. It's a toxin called glyphosate. Most people may not have heard of it. It's the active ingredient in the number one herbicide, pesticide on the planet. It's being sprayed on everything that we're eating. And it's estimated in 60% of the rainfall. It's ubiquitous in everything, everywhere in our environment. We are being exposed to this. Why is it a problem? It's a problem for many reasons. The senior scientist at MIT, Stephanie Seneff, she showed, and this was a 2012 study, she's done many and others have done many, but in this study, as I recall, she shows that this chemical is opening up barriers, our gut barrier, which I'm going to talk about, and our blood-brain barrier, which allows then toxins and things that shouldn't go into the brain to go into the brain. In this study, she showed that it allows these heavy metals that I just spoke about, like aluminum, to cross deeper into the brain and driving the epidemic. So yeah, we have to get upstream and detox the cell, but more specifically, the brain, and what's driving every hormone problem, everything in the body. I believe you can't touch diabetes, these conditions, these hormone conditions, without understanding toxins' roles, especially in the brain. So this glyphosate is allowing these chemicals to penetrate deeper into the brain and nerve tissue. Now here's another problem. She showed in other studies that it disrupts a pathway called the P450 pathway, which is a detox pathway. It's shutting it down. This chemical has the ability to shut and slow that detox pathway down. So now we're bioaccumulating more toxins in the cell, turning on more genes. You see the problem? I keep going back to the same problem. It also does something even more horrific. The toxin is disrupting our gut bacteria, called the microbiome. And in the last 10, 15 years, we've learned that these bacteria affect how your brain works, affect your immune system, how you feel, how you function, every possible thing, this microbiome. Matter of fact, some say that we may just be bacteria all in all, but we know that the communication between this bacteria affects every cell in our body, everything. And we're learning this connection. Autoimmune, let me give you one example, because we talked a little bit about autoimmune. There's a bacteria in our gut, we all should have it, called Bacteroides fragilis. That one bacteria, as an example of what I'm talking about, is responsible for making something called a T regulatory cell. Now what that simply means, it's a cell. It's an immune cell that tells your immune system, it regulates it. It tells it that everything's okay. So don't react to that little bit of food. Don't react to that pollen. Don't react to that toxin, whatever it is. It sees a reaction and it calms it down. So that's why it's linked to autoimmune. Here's the point. if this chemical, which it does, kills off these bacteria fragilis, what happens now is you don't make enough of these Treg cells. And now we know it's leading to this epidemic of autoimmune. And by the way, most people watching this, they don't feel well. They have autoimmune. They just don't know it. The testing is in the Stone Ages for autoimmune. It's undiagnosed. It's estimated that now type 2 diabetes is being driven by autoimmune. I mentioned type 1 is autoimmune. I purposely didn't mention it because it's too new. That type 2 is also connected to autoimmune. Autoimmune we can link to almost everything, but my point is this, that this chemical is disrupting this. I'm going to give you one more example how horrific this is and what we're in for, and then I'm going to tell you where it is. But there's a pathway called the Shikimate pathway. This is how your bacteria here make certain amino acids that you need to make certain brain chemicals like serotonin, the feel-good, dopamine, the feel-good chemical, right? And we have another epidemic going on of people on psychotropic drugs, depression. Just take this drug, right? Here's the answer. And we know, and these things are called serotonin uptake inhibitors. So they keep your body from uptaking serotonin so we can falsely elevate serotonin. Hey, you feel better for a little bit until you don't, right? Or it doesn't work at all and you end up on another one, then another one. We know that this chemical is disrupting bacteria that you need to make certain amino acids like tryptophan, tyrosine, to make these brain chemicals to feel normal. So again, Seneff's work out of MIT and others are showing that this chemical is driving depression, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, autism. I can keep going down, even obesity. So we're disrupting these bacteria, disrupting the immune system, disrupting the formation of certain brain chemicals, causing leaky gut, which is a new epidemic, which simply means your gut has openings, tight junctions they're called, and it's allowing undigested protein and chemicals to cross directly into your blood, which is driving more autoimmune. Your own body attacking itself, driving inflammation at the cellular level. So you see, glyphosate is making the chemicals that we genetically inherited and being exposed to worse, driving them deeper. Glyphosate is opening up our protective barriers, driving these chemicals into our bloodstream, driving autoimmune, disrupting bacteria that we need to make brain chemicals, immune cells to regulate our immune cells. I mean, my gosh, if we're going to impact the pandemic of diabetes, we better wake up to these chemicals, these toxins, glyphosate that's being sprayed on all of our food supply. I think it was 2007 that the patent on glyphosate that was developed by a company called Monsanto. And this is a whole nother topic, right? But that patent ran out. So now most of it's being made in China. They're spraying it on even every grain that's not 100% organic. They came up with the brilliant idea. This massively increases profits. It's called desiccation. If we spray it on grain, it desiccates it. It shrivels it up. It dries. It makes it easier to harvest. You're able to run 2 harvests a year instead of 1. I mean, imagine what this does for profits. They're spraying glyphosate on all of it. It's on our fruit. It's on our vegetables. It's on the very company that made the chemical. Genetically modified corn, soybeans, GMOs. We're being exposed to it in every oil, corn oil, vegetable oils. And it is being sprayed tenfold all over these things because they developed the plants, the seeds, genetically modified them, changed them at the genetic level to be able to tolerate more of this chemical. Imagine. So therefore, now we're able to spray all of this great chemical on it, and we're not going to kill the plant because it's resistant. We'll kill the weeds. We've solved the problem. Profits go up. Is it? We're creating a new epidemic. I believe what's happening right now is the greatest human experiment ever. When we look at this chemical, what it's doing to the already toxins we have in us from birth, it's turning on genes, disrupting the bacteria. I tell you, when you look at the statistics and you understand these 3 toxins alone, you understand why we're headed possibly for disaster unless we understand the causes. And as a community, as education, is the step 1. And then I believe we could start getting to the sources and the true causes Therein lies the solution. You know, something very simple was trying to be passed in the state of California. If these GMO plants are so great, right, that you're creating so you can spray more of your chemical on it, then let's label it. But you know what? They won't, because they know. Studies now are showing that this glyphosate is poison. You know, the company Monsanto defended it by saying that it doesn't cause this in humans, just bacteria it disrupts. And, you know, so it's not affecting humans. The problem is it's affecting the bacteria, as I just explained, that affect humans. So it's indirectly, because all of their safety studies were done on how it affects humans, not our bacteria that's driving this epidemic, right? So now they're being shut down, realizing this chemical is causing cancer. Yes, these GMOs are being outlawed in Europe, but what about here in this country? They're still allowed. You know, they're coming at it from different, you know, angles. And because Bayer has now bought Monsanto and that's going through, now perhaps it's going to be back in Europe. You know, so this is a huge issue, you know, that's affecting us at the cellular level multiple ways. You know, all the scientists who came out with early studies showing that this chemical is leading to tumors and cancer and other problems, they were ridiculed. Their studies were mocked. They attacked them. Well, they're not able to do that anymore. More and more studies are showing that this stuff, but unfortunately the public is not aware of this still, right? That these chemicals are driving these conditions. So I believe that if we're going to impact diabetes and other hormone-related conditions, weight loss resistance, all of it, we've got to deal with the 800-pound gorilla in the room. We've got to deal with the hidden cause, and I believe it's toxicity. So if we look at an answer, I said real detox has to be at the cell. You know, I think detox is in vogue right now. I do. You know, meaning that people think that, you know, I have to detox. And I think we can go into any health food store, alternative doctor, nutritionist, and see the 10-day cleanse, this cleanse, that cleanse. If you heard one thing in this, real detox has to go to the cell. I'm not against colon cleanses. I'm not against liver cleanses. You know, I'm not against most of those cleanses. I call them poopers. They just kind of, you know, make us poop more. That's a good thing. I'm not saying that's not, you know, that's a detox pathway that absolutely needs to be opened up. But if we don't affect the cell, I've developed what I call my 5 R's of cellular healing. The 5 R's has become a roadmap. I used to just teach doctors that, right? Of here's how you fix a cell, here's what's broken in the epidemic. And the 5 R's actually became known publicly as people got it. R number 1, remove the source. R number 2, you have to regenerate that cell membrane. Remember, that's where the receptors are. That's what allows good things in and out. Oh, and by the way, scientists understand today, one of the most brilliant, Bruce Lipton, he wrote a book called The Biology of Belief. He showed that the cell membrane is the critical component of turning off these bad genes. So R2 is regenerating that membrane. Critical. Detox, critical. Epigenetics, critical. Changing diabetes, critical for multiple reasons. R3, restoring cellular energy. Energy is the key. If you don't have enough cellular energy, which metabolically diabetics don't, once that goes, every process goes, even detox. R4 is reducing the cellular inflammation, not just of the outer membrane that blunts those receptors, but of the mitochondrial membrane where you make energy, the DNA, the nucleus membrane, all of it. We have to reduce that inflammation. Dietary things, some of the products we've created all play into all of these things. R5, I talked a little bit about methylation. Remember the Duke study? They gave those mice methyl groups and toxins depleted. So we have to restore it. It's the epidemic within the epidemic. They gave those mice methyl groups to turn off the gene. Those 5 cellular pathways, problems, is what the epidemic's affecting. So we have to restore. That's real detox. The cells know what to do. But unless we reestablish that, unless we fix that, the cell will never do what it knows to do, and that's detox itself. Real detox, true detox, has to occur at the cell, and that's why I call it true cellular detox.
All right, Dr. Pompa, thank you very much for being so gracious with your time and inspiration.
Yeah.
So tell me, what should I do? What can I do to regain vibrant health?
You know, I go back to why I'm even here, right? I wouldn't even be sitting here if I didn't get sick. So first of all, you know, anyone watching this, going through your own battle, God has purpose in it, you know, from pain to purpose. And when I train doctors, I always say, look for your purpose in your pain. This is a choice, you know. I could have went down this road. The first thing that you have to do is you have to make a choice. Number one, that you're going to get well. Number two, that you're willing to do whatever it takes. Number three, that you have to get to cause. That means you're going to have to change some things in your life. I think most people watching this realize it's diet. I think that maybe the eye-opener was cellular detox. Wow, toxins from birth are causing this. You know, you have to make a choice. I call them 3%ers. 3%ers, when you interview people that have fixed the unthinkable, right? Successful, changed the world. They talk about a choice they made one day. 3%ers hear reasons not to do something. They have fears. 97%ers, they listen to the fears. They listen to all the reasons why they shouldn't change their diet, why they shouldn't do this or why they shouldn't do that. 3%ers, they hear it, but something's greater than that. Their why. You know, something's pushing them beyond that fear and whatever it is. Here's the best part about it is choosing. Choose to be a 3%er. It's a choice. Choose it, you know? It's like you can do that. So you make the choice. It sounds trite, but it is a choice. I chose not to live my life like that. I would have rather died. And I know some people are saying, I'm making that choice. Yeah, don't ever give up. Get to the cause. You get to the cause, you remove it, you will get well. That's how I got my life back. It wasn't a magic vitamin. It wasn't a pill, powder, potion, lotion. I removed the cause, the body healed. It is that simple. It is that magic that the body can do. So, you know, therein lies the solution. You know, we didn't talk about some of the other things when I teach a multi-therapeutic approach. God, I would have loved to talk about fasting because it's a component here, right? You know, intermittent fasting, daily fasting, longer extended block fasts, as I call them, put with the cellular detox. That's a multi-therapeutic approach. When you look at why people are getting sick, it's a three-legged stool. Think about what a three-legged stool is. You have one leg, all legs have to be there for it to hold up, right? One leg is certain genes get turned on. We talked about that. They need to be turned off. Another leg is removing the stressors that turned on the gene. The last leg is this microbiome issue that's the gut and all that that's being disrupted by the chemicals. We affect all three legs of the stool. Therein lies the solution. A multi-therapeutic approach addressing all of it, that's what I teach. That's what I do. You change all of that, your life will change.
I never cease to be amazed by the healing properties of our bodies. Despite years of assault by processed food, bad habits, and environmental toxins, our bodies are ready to heal given the right chance. There is hope, and if you are struggling to find hope, your struggle is over. I invite you to join me because if you would, become an active part of this community as we continue to question our beliefs, search for answers, and apply solutions to live a thriving life. When you make the choice to own the complete series and support this mission, you're helping the world rise from the depths of diabetes and obesity. Your support allows us to stay on top of the research and spread our findings for free, or start some research of our own and keep bringing it back to you. Also, a portion of each sale gets donated to the charities that are helping people every day prevent and reverse diabetes and its complications, and find relief from their pain and suffering. In Episode 8, Part 1, we'll uncover how fasting may be the key to recovery and even the reversal of its complications. It may be the closest thing to the fountain of youth we know today. In Part 2, we bring it all together in a new, thriving lifestyle. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next episode.